To succeed and thrive at C-suite level, you need strategic clarity and operational excellence. Welcome to another episode of the C-Suite Framework podcast with me, Jennifer Geary. Now, those of you who have been listening to the podcast previously will note that there has been a little bit of a gap in service, and I apologize for that. Well, it's kind of sorry, not sorry, because I've been a busy bee doing a number of different things. Since the last podcast, I have updated and re-released the How to Be a Chief Risk Officer book, and there's now an accompanying Audible to go along with that book. And I have been creating a range of online courses, including the How to Be a COO course, How to Be a Chief Risk Officer course, the How to Be a Chief Risk Officer mini masterclass, and the online course for the Augmented COO. So there are now 4 online courses available for those of you who would like to give those a try. And details about all of that are available on my website, as always, www.csuiteframework.co.uk. In this episode of the podcast, I get to speak with Julien Haye. Now, Julian is someone that I was introduced to a number of years ago. We were 2 risk professionals. We were both grappling with writing books. I had some advantage on Julian in that I had already published a book, but Julian is actually a really experienced, prolific writer and blogger, as well as a seasoned risk professional. So we got on extremely well, and we've checked in with each other over the years and on each other's progress. Julian has written a book called The Risk Within, and this is all about the absolute defining influence of psychological safety on risk cultures and on the effectiveness of risk frameworks in organizations. And it's all the more interesting because Julian was a former hardened city trader, worked exclusively in numbers and risk-taking and limits and all that kind of thing. And for him to come on the journey that he's come on and to circle back and realize that it was all about psychological safety all along is a really fascinating arc in a career, and also a great book and a great story. So we're going to cross over to interview Julien about the risk within, and I think you're going to really enjoy the conversation. Here we go. Julien, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be here.
Julien, I think we met a couple of years ago when we were both in the throes of writing, and we've kind of bounced ideas off each other over the years. But it's great to have you here. And I guess for our listeners, maybe just walk us through, I mean, I've introduced some of it, but tell us about your career journey and how you came to where you are today.
Yeah, then we started, it was a bit of an accident because what I did in undergrad had nothing to do with financial services.
What did you do?
I actually worked more in corporate finance. So I was going more toward manufacturing and big corporate than financial services. But here we go. Sometimes accidents happen. And I think it's been perhaps a bit of a trend and theme across my career. So as you mentioned, I spent 26 years in financial services. I would not go through everything, but I've done a little bit of everything. And I think it's important as to why I ended up in risk. I actually started in finance because of my background. I ended up managing the administrative department as a financial controller for a large branch of a bank I used to work for. And then from there, I was promoted to the front office as a trader. And that was really my introduction into risk management. I was paid to take risks. And I keep reminding that fact to my clients who say, risk conservative, etc. I'm like, no, actually, risk is an enabler to what you do from a strategic standpoint. And if you don't take risk, you don't have a business. So that was really my introduction to risk. Then I worked in treasury, finance, transformation, as you mentioned, from a business standpoint, but also risk. And about 13 years ago, I had the opportunity to shift into more risk oversight and also capital adequacy, which I really liked because that was one of the spaces where you can actually see the entire organization. It brings together strategy with finance, with risk management, with treasury management, capital liquidity. And so I jumped into the bank wagon, and that's really how I ended up in risk, officially as a department, and I've been there ever since. And as you mentioned, I've been chief risk officer for large asset managers. I led very large global functions as well. And 2 years ago, I decided to go on my own, partially because I wanted to write the book we're going to talk about later on. I also wanted to launch my podcast, which you mentioned. And I thought, you know what? It's the right time in my career to do a little bit of the same thing, but from the other side, and actually enable other people to do what they want to do. For me, my interest then in risk is really about connecting risk as an enabler and really working into and with organization of all sizes, in fact, non-profit as well, to really enable them to do what they want to do, which is really, I find that passionate and also very rewarding to see the success behind.
And this, you and I, whenever we talk about this, we're sort of violently agreeing with each other about the function of risk. And I maintain that some of the best risk professionals I have come across are the ones who are accustomed to risk taking and view risk as creating that framework, creating limits within which you can move, within which you've got agency. Now, I can't resist. I have to just go back, though, on that one of those first career pivots, which was you were in finance, financial controller in an administrative function, and you were put into trading. Just tell us a little bit about that, because that is unusual, right?
It was extremely unusual, and I can tell you, out of an organization of thousands of people, I was the only one to end it up, because it was a French bank, and I was a complete outcast in that sense, in being promoted in that space. Everybody else was an engineer, I wasn't. But so I was at the right place at the right time. I had been brought in to turn around the administrative function, accounting and middle office of the branch I was in. I did that within a few months. And people were like, well, actually, he did very well. He learned from scratch. He didn't know anything. So we're going to throw him in the deep end. And he's going to move on the front office with not understanding what a derivative was. I had no financial literacy in that sense, but I learned. And it's been, especially in the first part of my career, it's been a recurring theme where the organization I used to work for really pushed me into areas I had no experience in to learn from scratch. That's how I ended up on trading floor. That's how I ended up in capital management for the first time in 2003. Or that's how I ended up managing a very large transformation program with 200 people reporting to me. It was close to 100 million budget. And I had no prior expertise. I had no background for that. And yet it worked very well. So it's about learning in the end. And taking on challenge as well.
I know, a huge challenge, a huge learning and testament as well to your ability to, learn and reinvent yourself. But I think sometimes if you're lucky enough to have an organization that sees your capability and is prepared to move you around, I did 5 different roles in Barclays. I think that's a real privilege. And I don't know if people coming behind us in their careers maybe get that privilege sometimes to try different things as much.
I'm not sure about that, but it's also a question of personality. And I think it comes back to I'm a risk taker. And now I find it, and I don't know if you've seen that in your interviews, I find it fascinating. I've interviewed people on my podcast and say, I'm very conservative. And then when you look into their career, I'm like, you're really, really not conservative. You've been a risk taker throughout your career. You might feel that you've actually been conservative with your choices, but no. I think sometimes it's a matter of being self-aware, if you will, and looking back with a critical eye to our career decision. But for me, I love a challenge. I must admit, I get bored very quickly. So the moment I've exhausted what I could learn, I'm like, time to move on, which is why I had a fairly short tenure in each of the roles except the last one. And that's probably why I'm here today, because I'm very comfortable dealing with uncertainty. I don't need a plan. I'm actually extremely good at bringing a vision to life and executing on it. And I love that. I love the challenge, and you pivot because things doesn't work, you learn from it, and then you get it better, and you get it better again and better again. And it's actually very relevant as well for book writing in the same way that it's relevant in everything in life.
And I think maybe sometimes, because I feel I've taken risks in my career as well and moved around, but I think what people maybe don't appreciate is the risk of staying still as well. The risk of getting stagnant, staying in a role. That's also a choice. That's also a risk, which you have to counterbalance against the risk of changing something. Brilliant. Well, listen, let's talk about the risk within. Let's talk about your book. And I'm just going to quote a sentence that really struck me because it's just so kind of strong and kind of strident in its view. It says, you said, I no longer believe it is possible to have an effective risk-aware culture without having psychological safety deeply embedded in the DNA of an organization. Tell us about that and tell us about your inspiration for writing this book.
So we start with that, and you're part of it, by the way, because our meeting together was part of me taking the jump. So thank you for that. I think there are 2 things that really motivated me I wouldn't say motivated me, it's enabled me to do that, or 3. 1, I've been writing for a very long time. I'm a serial producer of thought leadership piece, etc. I've been doing that for many, many years. And I've been playing or toying with the idea of writing a book, but I didn't really know how to get by doing it. And it's so meeting when I remember we met at the NED in near Bank in London. Great to have someone who actually has done it. So it's and you shared a lot of insight into that. That was fantastic. And I also read the book Write Your Own Book on the side by Hassan Osman. That was a fantastic template to when I was reading, it really explained how to actually write a book, especially if you self-publish. And I read that it's a fairly short book, I think about 100 pages. And I'm like, yeah, actually, I can do that. I'm already writing articles and blogs that are a few thousand words long. And actually, a book is 12 or 15 of those or 20 of those. And I can actually write 20 blogs. I have no problem. I'm already doing it. So it kind of get me the structure and get me the permission in a way to say, now I understand what I need to do. It's about content. And when I started the journey on the book, initially I wanted to talk about risk transformation. As you mentioned, I've led quite a few of those. And one thing I never understood is why we spend so much money in risk transformation. I worked for a very large program that spends sometimes up to 9 digits on risk transformation, if not more, and yet get so little results out of it. And I came across the notion of psychological safety and the work of Amy Edmondson, and then I read her book, and I was like, you know what? That's it. That is what is missing here. And when I look back critically to the work I've done, even as a chief risk officer, I realized that I've always pushed to build capabilities in risk. We have nice frameworks, we have nice policies. Sometimes the frameworks are actually working wonders. But if the organization culturally cannot use them because there's not permission to escalate issues, to actually properly use them, to have the proper discussion, then you can have the best thing in the world. It's not going to work. And if you look back into what happened with Credit Suisse and Archegos, where they lost close to $5 billion on that particular family office, that's exactly what happened. The risk system said there is a problem. No one did anything about it because they didn't want to escalate the issue. And we all know where Credit Suisse finished today. It doesn't exist anymore. And that, if you look back into especially bankruptcy in the financial services space, it's been a recurring theme. So for me, that connection point, a little bit of a pivot moving from I'm going to talk about risk transformation to actually why do you need psychological safety to really make risk management work is really what I wanted to explore. And the book is actually the first of a series that will explore more the people and cultural aspect in a way intersect back into risk management around risk leadership more broadly.
And I think one of the fascinating things about the book is you're sort of completely agnostic when it comes to risk systems, risk platforms, RCSAs, how you do it. And, you talk about these large organizations and, as you say, this huge investment, whether you're large or small, whether you've invested in a system or whether you haven't, the principles that you talk about can absolutely be applied. And indeed, you say, make the difference between them working or not.
And look, I work with CEOs of startups, for example, in my consultancy work. The discussion I have is actually a lot about that. And sometimes being able to have a very open and candid discussion, you're going to try to do that. Let me explain to you what's going to be the impact for you and whether you actually really want to go down that path. And it's interesting because on my LinkedIn, I've been driving a series of poll surveys, etc., to actually start getting some content for this book and the next one. And one person said, was it last week or this week? I can't remember. In one of the comments, well, it's very dangerous to speak up. And I think it was a risk executive who wrote as a comment to the poll survey that. And my response was, well, if you're thinking that and you're acting on it, then you're not doing your job. And by the way, in my experience, however difficult and challenging senior executive can be, they actually don't want to fail. And they need to hear, and even if they don't want to hear what you have to say, they actually need to hear it. And what I've seen time and again in my career is the most challenging people actually are very thankful if you come to them and say, you know what? Now we stop the hard thing and we are going to have the proper discussion on what you need to know. Otherwise, you're going to have a big problem. And I've seen that time and again, people reacting very positively regardless of their level of seniority in the organization to that. But it takes courage, and a lot of culture are not conducive to it.
I think it depends, right? And it's not a coincidence that if you look at lots of frameworks for risk-aware cultures and governance, they talk about tone at the top. They talk about responding to bad news. Are you an organization that shoots the messenger? Or are you one that's prepared to, as you say, maybe stop, reevaluate, reassess, take some less than positive feedback or hear some less than positive news? So I don't think it's universally positive. I think it's true that people experience it's dangerous to speak up, but that's what makes the difference, isn't it, between an effective risk culture or not?
It does. And a lot of it is perception as well. And I think senior executive, when they drive in board level as well, actually, when they drive culture, firstly, I'm not sure they always realize that it's their role. And I had discussion with board directors on very large organizations saying, well, that's what we're doing. Well, yes, but you have an oversight role as a board, but you also set the culture. And if you don't challenge the executive team on the lack of escalation of issues and behavior and inadequate behavior across the organization and just waiting for things to bubble up, then you're not doing your job either. So for me, there is that push and pull around. It's not something you write down. It's something people have to live. And it's also not about avoiding conflict. In fact, psychological safety is there to flush out conflict and making sure they're being resolved. It's not about being nice. It's about having the right discussion and the discussion that needs to be having. And I tend to run for the hills when I hear people saying, oh, we're a big family, big happy teams, everybody gets along. I'm like, ooh, that is not a good start, especially when it comes to an HR function. That's exactly the opposite of the culture you want, in the sense that, yes, we have to respect each other, which is different to being nice, but being respectful doesn't preclude from having the right discussion behind, even if it makes people uncomfortable. And invariably, I'm seeing the same thing, right? People say, hey, we're very nice, and then you can't have the actual discussion that is needed for the organization behind.
Yeah, the availability of a passionate, unfiltered debate and constructive conflicts is a good indicator. And I think if, as an organization, you're embarking on a risk journey or a journey to improve your risk framework, the other thing the board has to be aware of or ready for is the number of risk and risk events and near misses is going to go up. And that's a good thing, because it means people are it doesn't mean they're new. It doesn't mean the risk has got worse, but it means people are actually talking about it for the first time, which is a good thing.
Yeah, and I think I gave that example based on previous experience in my book. One thing that I found as well, and I'm touching on that in the book for very explicit reason, is I've seen through risk transformation exactly what you just said, like number of events multiplied by 4. And then the next thing I know, I have the executive team 2 or 3 years down the line say, but why is the volume not reducing? And my answer to that is, well, because from a strategic standpoint, you deprioritized the transformational program that were required to address the problem on the ground. So what you've done practically is to let people on the ground, operational people on the ground with a problem, you decided it was not a strategic priority. Now you complain that the issues have not been fixed. It's mutually exclusive. And I spent quite a lot of time in the book coming back to that, because I've seen that time and again in my career. To operate properly in a safe environment, even an executive level, there needs to be that alignment between you own a problem and that's how we're going to help you to fix it. Or we've decided we will not prioritize that and we understand we're going to live with that problem. But what you can't do is to fall like a ton of bricks.
I love one of the things that you said, Julian. I think it was towards the end. And you said that most of the organizations you have worked in have looked like, you say, permanent building sites with change the only constant. And you talk about how leadership manages the triad of change, risk, and psychological safety while maintaining a high performance culture. Just say a little bit more about that.
So change comes in multiple ways and forms. In fact, I was talking about it with my client this morning, actually, interestingly enough. With change, you might break things, you might pivot. What is not doing is maintaining the status quo, which means you might actually move established processes, you might change established culture, and you might start from a very good place and end up in a very wrong place as a result, because especially the cultural aspect is not always managed through change initiatives. So I find that it's very important to actually, especially not only in change, but actually in transformation especially, it is critical to first understand that change is about people, especially transformation. You cannot transform an organization if you don't empower your people, because they're the one actually you need to transform. It's not your organization itself. That is the first thing. The second thing is that you don't know what's going on at granular level. And you need people to be able to be candid and open around. Practically, if you want to get to your vision, you will have to do X, Y, and Z. And I find that many times over, especially executives don't want to have those discussions, which means that, that's what we're going to do. Like, there's no chance on earth they can actually deliver on their vision because they don't understand the starting point. So the solution they're applying then is wrong, and they're setting their organization for failure. So for me, having an environment that first understands the impact of change on the culture and people, and secondly, enable people to be part of the journey is critical.
So in your book, you talk about 4 stages of psychological safety and how to embed those. Just tell our listeners a little bit more about those.
So, and I will start by framing the high level, which is you don't get to a place like what Google has done, for example, with Project Aristotle, right? Where they look back to understand what drove psychological safety and then how they get to a much better place. You always get, from a cultural standpoint, in stages. I didn't create that framework, by the way. I picked it up from an author, and I think it's a Harvard professor. I will find the name for you. I don't have it on top of mind, but you progress from pretty much having nothing to learner to being fully advanced. Especially in the work I do with my client in that space, it's critical to understand where you're starting from. Like in any transformation, you don't go there in one go, you're saying, I want to be the best in class, while you actually don't even know where you're starting from, probably a low base. So understanding the various stages of development of your organization and how you move from one to the next is what the roadmap does. I've covered it in the book. I've provided more details as well in articles I've published on the side, simply because people need to understand the ingredients they want to, or they need to go through to actually get to the place that will really deliver on, yes, your people are going to tell you what you need to do. I'm not going to cover it today. I think I would invite the listeners to actually read the article and the book, because it has to be structured and you can't really wing it. You really need to have step by step and enable your organization to digest the change.
And we'll include some references in the show notes for our listeners so that we can do that. But I think what that shows and demonstrates is, people might think that psychological safety is kind of a woolly, soft concept, but actually no, it's something quite precise and specific. It's a framework and it's a way of doing it and a way of going about it to get the results that you want. So we'll include some details on that, Julian. This podcast is brought to you by the bestselling How to Be a range of books. These books, authored by me, Jennifer Geary, in collaboration with other seasoned experts, break down roles such as the COO, Chief Risk Officer, Chief People Officer, and Chief Sustainability Officer into their component parts. They explain the technical capabilities you need, but also how to operate at this level, preparing yourself, getting to know your peers, engaging with culture, strategy, building your team, and much more. Over 30,000 books have been sold, and the books have received overwhelmingly positive reviews. There's even a book about the role of AI called The Augmented COO. Check out the books, available on Amazon and Waterstones now. I'm going to move just from the content of the book. I'm just interested, obviously, writer to writer, on your writing process. And I know, by the way, when I met you, I had 100% confidence you were going to get a book done because you had all of these blog articles. You made writing a habit all the time. But I guess, does that writing process come easily to you? How and when do you do it? Just talk a bit about, the writing process for you.
As you just said, and I mentioned before, I used to write a lot. Now, writing a book is a slightly different journey. For me, the starting point was a catalyst around almost giving myself permission to do it, because I think it's what blocks a lot of people. It's a big undertaking, which it is, by the way. And, you've wrote multiple books more than I did, so you've been there through that journey multiple times. What I've done to start with actually is not to start straight into writing a book, is to learn a little bit about the writing process. So I mentioned the discussion we had and also the book with Hassan Osman. And I've also started looking, when I read The Chief Risk Officer, I went back into it. I read also the book of some of the author I interviewed on my podcast as well, just to see the structure, things I like and things I didn't like. And I wanted to have a clear template around how am I going to structure the book itself, notwithstanding the content. And what helped me as well a lot is what am I going to do with the book behind? Because initially, I'm writing a book and that's it. And I realized, talking to other people, actually, no, it's more, when you write a book, it's more the start of you cross the start line rather than the finish line. People are saying, you wrote a book, you're done. I'm actually, no, if you do that, you can, but you're going to miss out on what comes next and what it changes afterwards. So in a way, I wrote the book, I had in mind already how I will use it afterwards. And so a lot of the structure of the book is also catered for that. I research a lot. I read several books in the making. So I mentioned A Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson. I wrote The Ride of a Lifetime by the CEO of Disney. I wrote several books in that context that picked up a few things here and there and nuggets that kind of fed into it. I read a lot of articles. And then as I was researching for the book, I read more and more around other things. And I provided quite a lot of examples in the book about that. I'll be transparent. I've used ChatGPT quite extensively to do a lot of research as well, because you can access a lot of data in a way I couldn't do by myself. And so all of that came into the process to actually start getting the structure. In the process itself, I wrote chapter by chapter. So because I already had that structure, I've had, I think, 5 versions of the book. Version 1, I went through it myself and then I rewrote part of it. Then version 2 went to a handful of people who read the book again, providing me some feedback on it. Then I had version 3, and then I had version 4. And version 4 is the one that went to the publisher, and then I had version 5 and 6 with the publisher itself. So it's been quite a journey to get there. It's not one step, it's multiple steps in the journey. And as I'm already writing the next one, I'm already changing things. Why? Because I read other books and things I found interesting in between, and I'm embedding technology and data in a way I had not done for the first one. And I'm going to give you 2 examples here. For example, I'm looking to more first principle and analytics that helps me provide a more structured way on problem statement, why the book is here and how to think about it in a more structured way. And I've also been conducting a lot of surveys, and I think I've gathered it anywhere between 7,000 to 8,000 insights by now to actually feed into and providing more context to the next book. In fact, even for the first one. And also I'm doing interviews with masters, which give me again insight on what people are looking for that I can use for input into the next book, and also running pilots as well, so that I can actually test some of the things I'm writing in a way that I've not done before.
That's incredible. There's so much to unpack there. I mean, I think, a few things I picked up on, and I remember this as well. One of the first things someone said to me in terms of writing a book was, if you want to write, you have to read. And literally, like in the days when I'm doing nothing but writing, I'm also leaving aside time for reading as well. There's that kind of process, isn't there, of like ingesting prose in order so that you can create good writing yourself. But also that kind of first principles data, like something fresh, like a new survey, new insights, new ways of doing things as a grounding for the points that you're putting across. You've nailed it, Julian. Like it's, it sounds like you've got tons of ideas and tons of content still to come.
And I can tell you the structure of my future book is evolving almost by the day, because I'm feeding in, even without writing anything really, more ideas, more concept I want in, and things that I want to break down, and more data. And I think it's important to be able to evolve the style. I don't know how long it took you to actually get to a space where, like, if you look back in your first book compared to now, how much difference do you see? And I suspect the second book is going to be already different in tone and style and content. And if I'm getting to book number 5 or 6, I think it's going to be different again.
I happened upon a really good structure for COO for the first book, and I've stayed reasonably true to that structure in my subsequent books. But what I've done in the last 2 years is updated and refreshed the COO book, which was 7 or 8 years old, and the Chief Risk Officer book, which was coming up on 4 years old. And definitely, I think my writing is smoother. That definitely improves over time. But I'm pleased the structure pretty much held up. I added some bits, but it gets easier the whole time. You referred to it earlier on. You said about how writing a book wasn't the end. It was actually the beginning of a whole new phase, of a whole new chapter for you. Just tell us what that has done for you and your career, and of course, now your consultancy.
And I will put an immediate caveat or disclaimer, which is it's still early days, right? Book was published in April, so it's still very new. But as I said, when I wrote it, I already had in mind some of the things I wanted to do with it. One of them was to launch a leadership program that would build on the back of the content of the book to help people apply and go beyond. And I will come back to that in a minute. So when I think about the book itself, what it has done is strengthen the credentials behind, because not everybody has wrote a book. Let's be honest about that. It also gave me more focus as well around how even I wanted to position my consultancy services, because then it provided really an anchor around where I want to get to. And really it added an extra layer to the thought leadership I had been publishing for quite some time. Now, what it has done as well, and that speak to the credential, is this morning I went to a client meeting, and the first thing I see is my client with my book under her arm saying, "Oh, by the way, I wanted you to sign it, and I bought a couple of versions so that my team can read it." And like, yes, this is exactly what I hope will be happening without forcing it, and I'm glad it happens. It also opens new doors and really help structure new services and content. So I'm working on the leadership programs, as I mentioned, and talking to quite a few organizations around that. I've also established the consultancy service around it to build around the capability and then anticipating what will come next. I've been offered the opportunity to contribute to a book that will be published by the World Scientific Publishing Organization, so more in the academia space. I don't think any of that would have happened if I'd not written the book and it was not out there.
Yeah, if you hadn't put it out there in the world in the first place. And I think No, I agree with everything that you said. I think with me initially, my first book in particular was, I just want to write a book and I'm done. It was that sort of, everyone's got one book in them, write it and done. And I didn't, I was in a full-time executive role at that point, and I didn't see the development potential. But it's exactly the same as you've experienced. With the additional books, I've created a framework that I can use for training courses, for online training and in-person training, for coaching. And yeah, it just provides this backbone of content and gives back in lots of other ways. And tell us, Julian, a bit about running your own consultancy. Like, what kind of services at the moment, anyway, do you provide? Like, what kind of person comes to you or organization comes to you, and what do you help them with?
And I will also position something on which I mentioned in my career, which is I moved clearly from very large organizations, sometimes the size of a small country like Deutsche Bank that has 100,000+ people worldwide, to myself, and steps in between and working with very small or very large organizations as clients. It's about helping. It's about my vision on risk and business and how it interconnects, right? When I transitioned into where I am today, I had several things I had in mind. In fact, I found the book from the CEO of Blackstone. Absolutely fascinating from that, right? I can't remember his name, but he transitioned from being a managing director at Lehman Brothers in the 80s before it collapsed for the first time and being bought by Amex, to creating Blackstone. And he explained his journey there. And he said, despite business card he had in his former role, no one opened his doors to him when he moved into creating Blackstone behind. And for a year and a half, it was very difficult with his business partner. They couldn't get through the door. And so I was very conscious of that when I started, around no one is waiting for me. When you start on your own, it's a lonely journey. So you need to be clear, not why you live, but where you want to get and the purpose of it. And in fact, over the past 2.5 years, I had quite a number of people coming to me and saying, I've just done a transition, or I'm considering transition because I'm bored with my job. And my answer to that is, great. It's great that you want to take the step. You need to be super clear as to why you're going there, because otherwise you will end up having plenty of time on your hands and you won't know what to do with it. And I've seen people telling me literally they're getting crazy because they don't know what to do during a downtime. So that I was very clear on the other side: book, podcast, consultancy, and then completely by accident, all of that turned into a more portfolio career, because I tried to approach an organization to become my client, and they asked me, can you please work for us part-time as a risk executive? And then always consider coming on the board of non-profit and profit organization, but not now, in 10 years' time. And then I had executive search firm coming to me and saying, well, it might be the right time for you. And by the way, here are the ideas. And the rest is history. So 2.5 years down the line, I end up in a portfolio career a bit by accident, not by design. And I found that super rewarding. And now I'm getting to, okay, what services do I offer to the organization I work with? Firstly, I would say who I work with as well, because that's an interesting one. I work with very small startup and nonprofit to very large financial services organization, and perhaps also consumer goods. I have something in the pipeline that might lead me to that. The context is always risk strategy. And really what I'm focusing on is strategic risk leadership and building on the book and other things around how do you drive the right culture, capabilities across your team, and make sure you have alignment with your people there, and really connect what you do in a risk stand back to your strategy. And I tend not to go through the operational aspect. I think there are people that can do that probably better than I can, but the high-level strategic aspect, from a connecting strategy to organization to culture, is really what I'm passionate about, and really where I help people the most.
I think that clarity of vision is so true. And I think one of the nice things that I've found as well over a similar time frame to you is that sort of the organizations and the people that seek you out are the ones where you find resonance. I've been honored when, a not-for-profit that I really admired came and, looked me up and asked me to give a talk, or, an organization that's keeping banking services on the high street and so on. So you kind of find your people, or your people find you. I don't know which it is, which is lovely along the way as well. Julian, we're almost out of time. It's been brilliant to hear about your journey and everything that you're doing. And as you say, lots more to come. But I want to bring up one final point, and because you've brought this up and talked about this very proudly yourself, but you've talked openly about becoming a proud father with your partner and the process of doing that and what that has done for your life. As a kind of a sign-off, do you just want to talk about that and share that with our listeners?
Yeah, so for my scene, I'm the proud father of 2 little girls, the last one being 7 weeks old. So it's all new and fresh. for background, I'm gay, which means as a gay person, we can't have kids on our own. I wouldn't say not by lack of trying, but it doesn't work. So the process to get there is always a little bit more complicated. And I wrote a fair bit about that. We went through surrogacy, especially for our first journey. We were extremely involved with our surrogate as well, too, because we were curious. I wanted to understand how it worked, and also to support her in the best possible way in a partnership. And that really changed I wouldn't say even view, my understanding of woman's condition as a woman and what does that mean, especially future mothers, which until you actually get there and really get into, I would say, more the details and really have those discussions in depth around all the changes that are happening, what does that mean to her, etc., you can't really get. And that really opened my eyes on women's position in society more broadly. And some of the blockers, and I'm a staunch advocate, for example, of not only equality pays, etc., that people are talking about, but when it comes to parenting, equal parenting policies. Because I think it's one of the main blockers for women to actually be able to, at least if they choose to have more options from a career standpoint, not being stuck. And also being a father of 2 little girls, I want them to really be able to grow up in an environment where all the doors are open to them and not partially closed because someone else, I decided perhaps out of tradition or simply because they don't want to or because they're patriarchal, whatever else, impose a choice on them. And the way I'm educating my girls is really around the world is your oyster. Never let anyone telling you what to do, except us as parents. So until you're 18 and then you do what you want. But please listen to us. But really empower them and enable them to be everything they want to be and not letting someone else choose for them where they should go. Now, from a parenting standpoint, I've always thought it was better, and that only confirmed what I thought, not to get into anyone's parenting style, even though it also confirmed to me certain things I noted before is, well, some it's nature, some is nurture. And I sometimes seeing certain parents making certain choices like, ooh, you're going to make your life more complicated than it ought to be. But as a parent, you do what you can and how you can do it. So I'm very respectful of that. But at least it gave me that perspective. And I think one thing I didn't change my mind on that creating a storm on my Facebook page many years ago, where I said that I don't think toddlers should be allowed on overnight flights and especially long flight, because this is not a good thing. So a lot of people were in disagreement with me. Some were silent agreeer as well. But I can tell you, having now 1 toddler and 1 7-week-old, I can only confirm what I said all of these years back. It is not a good idea. And you might be lucky. Sometimes you're not. And I will stop on that.
Oh, yeah, I can see both sides of that one. And I can imagine that creating some controversy. But also, it's really lovely to hear your curiosity and interest and engagement with your surrogate mother, with the provider of your baby. And the experience that she went through, that we women go through, both, in terms of pregnancy, but also in the world and in bringing a child into the world. And I wish all men were as thoughtful and as aware of it as you've shown. Julien Haye, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Congratulations on your book. The Risk Within is available in all good bookshops, I'm sure, and we'll share some details in the notes. But Julien Haye, thank you very much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure, and looking forward to continuing the discussion.
We hope you enjoyed the podcast. For more information about the How to Be a books, the C-Suite Framework courses, the podcast, or to get in touch with me, head over to www.csuiteframework.com.